module 2 here. We've done the first one, our welcome and overview. And here we'll talk about the basics of soil and soil invertebrates. So first, just a refresher that invertebrates are the groups of animals that don't have backbones. Some are entirely soft-bodied and some have hard exoskeletons or shells as an outer covering. Invertebrates are an extremely diverse group of organisms. Nearly 70% of all described species on Earth are invertebrates. And of all those invertebrates, about 95% of all animal species are invertebrates. So as you can see on this pie chart here, sort of the green section are the vertebrate animal groups: amphibians, mammals, reptiles, birds, and fish. And then all the other segments in this pie are different invertebrate groups. And then within invertebrates, you can see that insects are the largest group in terms of the number of species. And of all these insects, only around 2% are estimated to be pests that cause economic damage to human interest or activities. Because in fact, that leaves 98% that, especially from our human perspective, we consider them allies and beneficial, and we really depend on them for life on Earth. And Xerces' motto is protecting the life that sustains us. And really, the fate of the world's insects is inseparable from our own. Insects perform all these types of functions. They're important for soil health, pest control, other ecological services, including crop pollination. So as are shown here in these photos, insects are important for their role in nutrient cycling and decomposition. We'll be talking more about those insect groups today. Also for how they balance or manage pest populations. Insects also turn plants into food for other animals. And the way that birds really rely on caterpillars to feed their young chicks is one example of that. And then for us, many of the fruits and vegetables that we eat depend on insects for their pollination. So again, those insects are turning plants into food for us as well. And then they also are important in their role in helping plants reproduce and sustain those plant populations. Yet so many of the invertebrate and insect groups are in decline. Decline means that the number of individuals or the number of species are decreasing. In a telling study published in 2017, the biomass of insects in nature reserves in Germany decreased by 70%. And this is in nature reserves, where presumably insects would be the most protected from various threats. But despite that, such significant declines were measured. I imagine most of you can recognize the insect in this photo. It's a firefly, or also known as a lightning bug. It's fairly recognizable by most people. And I'm wondering though, did you know that fireflies are actually soil invertebrates? If you didn't know that already, you'll be learning more about that soon too. Pollinators are another group of invertebrates that are in decline. By one estimate of a global intergovernmental report, 40% of invertebrate pollinators may be at risk of extinction. I think the media and the news have covered the difficulties facing honeybee populations pretty well. But honeybees are actually only one type of bee, and they were brought to the US centuries ago from Europe. They're considered a managed species and they're non-native. However, in North America, there are nearly 4,000 other species of wild native bees. And this photo shows one of them. This is the rusty-patched bumblebee. It's a Midwestern and formerly Eastern species, which was added to the Federal Endangered Species List in 2017. This is the first bumblebee to receive, or actually to need and receive, this kind of protection. However, overall, relative to other species groups, very few bees, butterflies, and other invertebrates are on the endangered species list. This doesn't mean that they're safer from extinction. It really points to how little attention has been paid to these species and their distribution to date. All right, another little question here. Is a bumblebee a soil invertebrate? What do you guys think? Okay, I hope this isn't a spoiler, but the answer is yes. Bumblebees can be considered soil invertebrates in addition to being considered pollinators. So not only bees and butterflies, but also predators or natural enemies, such as this tiger beetle, which is a species of the eastern US, pictured here. Decline has also been measured in these predatory groups. Approximately a third of tiger beetle species and subspecies in the US are sufficiently rare to be considered threatened or endangered. So, okay, perhaps the fact that this beetle is pictured on a background or on the soil surface, it gives us a clue that tiger beetles, yes, these are also soil invertebrates. So almost anywhere that invertebrates have been studied, what's been measured is that they are in decline. But what about soil invertebrates? Well, actually, our scientific and ecological understanding of soil invertebrates is still at a fairly basic level. This quote is from a recent review that looked at trends in invertebrate populations globally. And the authors said that, for instance, soil invertebrates and soil-dwelling larval stages of flying insects, which represent a major biodiversity pool in terrestrial ecosystems. These groups have been woefully neglected in many biodiversity databases and assessments, as well as in conservation actions and policies. So they're basically saying these are such important groups ecologically, yet they've been understudied so far. And so their recommendation is, given that a major fraction of invertebrates live below the ground, and considering their significant functional role, biodiversity monitoring urgently needs to include soil organisms and functions. And there are certainly research groups that do study soil invertebrates, but compared to other insect and invertebrate research, less is still known about those groups. So it's hard to measure what decline is if such, or what the status is of a lot of these groups, since so little is currently known. This slide shows some of the 4 primary causes or categories of insect decline. So again, in almost every location or situation where they've been studied, insects are in decline. And these are the major causes for that. And then at the bottom of the arrows are the different actions that we can each take individually on whatever size farm or yard or flower pot that we may be caring for. And so with habitat loss, conserving and creating habitat is really at the heart of addressing the threat of habitat loss. Quality habitat doesn't only support pollinators, it's also important for natural enemies of crop pests. And adding habitat to a farm or an area or a yard will, as well as crop rotation, having a diversity of cash crops and other conservation practices, creates a more diverse landscape and habitat. Another major threat, pesticides, and this includes insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, miticides, all the sides. Of course, these can impact invertebrates directly and indirectly, again, by leading to habitat degradation or loss. They can also cause non-lethal effects. Many herbicides that have been studied in honeybees have shown, many herbicides and other pesticides that have been studied in honeybees have shown how they actually affect the digestive system and the microbes that live in the honeybees' guts, and it leads to poorer honeybee health and overall wellness. So one of the solutions, of course, to that is reducing our reliance and use of pesticides through integrated pest management, and also through adding more habitat and more diversity, and that diversification really deconcentrates the type of plants that pests can eat. It also helps to attract and support larger populations of beneficial insects that, again, balance any boom and bust pest cycles. The third threat is disease and non-native species or managed pollinator species, such as honeybees, or some bumblebee species are also managed as hives and moved around to pollinate crops, or to pollinate tomatoes, for example, inside of greenhouses. So these managed pollinators can actually concentrate and transmit disease to populations of wild pollinators. So again, trying to create diversity and a place where wild native pollinators can live naturally and pollinate crops is important. And then finally, with climate change, one way to address just all the variabilities and the changing trends and the higher extremes and lower extremes is, again, by creating more diversity that's better able to withstand drought, extreme rainfall, or late or early frosts. And then also perennial cover of vegetation can help capture and hold carbon in the soil rather than releasing it to the atmosphere. This is a map that we can look at to see how we kind of currently use land in the continental US. It's based on USDA data for the lower 48 states. These are grouped by broad use categories, and then these colors are overlain to kind of show relative size. So the yellow represents land that's managed as pasture or rangeland. Green are forests or tree farms that are managed for timber and other products. The brown is cropland. Blue is special use. These are kind of actually what was categorized in here are natural or wild areas, so national, state, and local parks. Gray, also Department of Defense land and golf courses. And gray was miscellaneous. And then pink is urban areas that are covered in buildings or pavement. And then this is that same data and kind of the same broad color categories, but broken down into some subcategories. And so I think if we look again here at the yellow, which again was rangeland or pasture for livestock, that was the largest single category. And then all the brown or tan areas are the crops. So all that land that we use for food production is not an insignificant amount. So the message here is just to encourage you, whether you're managing land in pastured areas, in cropped areas, or in the pink, in urban areas or your yards, each of us can have an impact on how we manage that land for pollinators, for soil invertebrates, and all of that diversity. Okay, next we'll switch here just to a bit of soil basics. And I really I'm calling this soil's magnificence. The more I learn and think about soil, it really is magnificent. again, from a perspective of human utility, there are several main functions that we can categorize soil as having. It's a medium for plant growth and habitat for wildlife. Soil is also critical to regulate water supply and filter water. Soil is where all the recycling and storage of organic matter happens. And then also kind of anywhere we are on land, whether we're directly walking on soil or we're in buildings or on roads, soil underlies all of that. And so it's also important for where and how we build or construct things as humans. There are 5 main factors involved in soil formation, which is also called pedogenesis. And those 5 factors are the parent material. That's basically the type of bedrock or mineral source that soil is derived from. There are the organisms that live in and among the soil and also help to shape it. This includes plants as well as animals, as well as bacteria and fungi. There's also climate, which affects how soil forms, topography as well. And then finally, time. So the duration or the length of period that all these factors are interacting with each other. And the photo here, I think, shows the effect of a lot of those factors together. So I believe this is on Long Island. So, you know, there'd be some granite and limestone as parent material. The organisms here are just plants, but of course there are other animals present that we can't see. And then topography, you can see here how the larger rocks and pieces are falling down with gravity, and then smaller pieces sort out that way. So topography really has an effect in terms of how gravity acts on these particles. You can also see how processes are working to form soil, and processes are considered things like weathering or organic matter accumulation, or actually loss of organic matter as well. So that's just a bit of a refresher about the interactions of these different factors and how soils form. There are also several ways to describe and categorize soils. Physical types are talking about texture, aggregate stability, bulk density of soil. Some chemical characteristics are the pH, the cation exchange capacity, and other measures of fertility. There are biological ways to measure or categorize soil, such as through respiration or measuring microbial diversity and abundance. And then other ways that soils are categorized may be through their color or the age of soils. And there's also a whole soil taxonomy, where soils are organized into orders and then also into series. Here we're going to just take a little pause and have Liz open the chat. And we've got a question for you that's got an open-ended answer, and we'd like to ask you to please reply in the chat. So at your farm or yard, what is the soil type? And there we're mostly interested in if you know what soil series your farm or yard is. Additionally, or alternatively, we'd also like to know what's the soil texture like at your farm or yard. And so that would be whether it's more sandy or there's more clay, maybe it's a little bit rocky, or there's a lot of silt or loam texture. So go ahead and we'll take a little time to let people fill that in the chat. Great, we've got all kinds of good responses coming in here. I'm not going to go through everyone, but we're seeing sandy loam, clay loam, Martinton silty loam, Claremont Cincinnati, Iowa. So those names are different soil series. They're often named after the location where they were first described by soil scientists. And then you can search online and actually find descriptions of soil series. Mollisol, that's one of the soil orders. So in soil taxonomy, words that end in that suffix, SOL, which is related to our word for soil, that's how you can identify when someone's talking about a soil order. So mollisols are typically soils that formed under grassland vegetation, and they actually make for rich, fertile farmland. So a lot of the soils in the Midwest and sprinkled throughout other areas that were historically grasslands have these mollisols. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing about the soils where you live in the chat. We're gonna, I think, Liz, you can leave that open or close, whatever makes sense there, and we'll move on here again. And now talk a little bit about soil health. So beyond simple intuition, one technical definition of soil health is the degree to which soil is optimized to support various ecosystem services. There's also the definition by John Doran and Michael Zeiss written here. It's the capacity of soil to function as a vital living system within these different land use boundaries to sustain plant and animals and humans. And one regenerative farmer that Xerces has worked with has described it as when he's able to decrease external inputs while maintaining good and stable crop yields. I'm going to have to jump a little bit ahead here for time. But we've got the 4 soil health principles featured here. On the right, 2 of them are really focused on protecting soil, and on the left, 2 are focused on feeding the life in soil. And we'll talk about these again later in the session, but I wanted to introduce those here. And then get on to soil invertebrates. So this is really the focus for our short course, that soil is full of life, from the tiniest microbes, bacteria, fungi, and protists, and increasing in size, to mesoinvertebrates, macroinvertebrates, and also, of course, including land plants and vertebrate animals. This slide is just a preview as we're getting ready to go into the profile section here in Module 3. So just wanted to highlight all the roles that soil animals, especially soil invertebrates, play. And we could not live without all these functions and roles. And again, 1 teaspoon of soil has been estimated to contain more living organisms than there are people in the world. This is really talking about the estimate of 1 billion bacteria, several thousand protozoans, so these very tiny microscopic animals, and then getting into nematodes and many other fungal filaments and other tiny animals. Just quickly, we're not going to talk much at all about bacteria and fungi, but they are an important part of soil life. Bacteria are the most abundant soil organism. They feed on carbon, contribute to decomposition, and they are eaten by the micro and mesofauna. They're also really important in their role of transforming atmospheric nitrogen to forms that are available to plants. Fungi are also very abundant in soil. They decompose the plant residue and break it down and make it available for other groups. They help regulate pathogens, and they also multiply the capacity of roots to absorb water, nutrients, and tolerate drought. And the reason why I want to show this image is to illustrate the flow of energy in soil ecology. So this The green arrows show the direction and relationship of energy flow between these groups of organisms. This does not show living plants and their roots or larger animals, but it really zeroes in on the organic residues, mostly dead or shed material from plants and dead animals as well. That's the green triangle at the bottom left. And then if we look at bacteria circled in orange, we see this movement or transfer of energy and decomposition, but these are short networks. They don't really connect directly to the other groups that are pictured here. And then if we look at fungi in the blue rectangles, you can see how fungi really connect the organic residues with the mesoinvertebrates and then up to the macroinvertebrates. So with that, I'm gonna stop and switch over to Jennifer for module 3.